people. Again, my name is Reverend Noel Andersen. I work on with the UCC National Collaborative on Immigration, and I also work for Church World Service as the Grassroots coordinator. My area is focused around immigrant and refugee rights, and it's really an honor to be part of the UCC. I'm a UCC clergy myself. Working on this very important work in this very difficult time where immigrants and refugees and Muslims and really all people of color are under attack day in and day out. Also, we know the LGBTQ community. We have been all watching the news and seeing how these families are being separated, how these kids are being torn apart, and how even a Honduran father, committed suicide after his child was taken from him. And so as the United Church of Christ, I know that when we're going to talk more about all the ways that our folk have been responding, and we have been hitting the streets, we have been calling our Congress people, we have been putting out statements. I'm really thankful for Reverend Traci's leadership in putting together that pastoral letter, and for our great communications workers, Connie Larkman, and putting together action alerts. Thanks to Jesse as well, and others. Katie Adams we'll hear from in a minute, who does our policy work on this stuff. And so the agenda today, we are going to start with a welcome and a prayer, which we're getting into now, and then move to the policy updates, which Katie Adams, our policy person here in DC, who's sitting next to me, will help us on that. I'll kind of kick it off with a little timeline on criminalization of migrants. And then we will learn more about what's going on with the executive order, what is happening with Congress, what are next steps politically. And we want to talk about the grassroots action and faith community response, what is happening on the ground. We'll hear from Reverend Randy Mayer, who has a church, the Good Shepherd United Church of Christ, on the border. And then we want to hear about the ways in which our UCC Refugee and Disaster Response is helping in this critical time, and the appeal that we put together as the UCC. So that will be Mary Schaller Blaufuss is with us to tell us more about that. And we're very honored to have our justice and local witness, local church, justice witness and local church ministry executive minister, try to get your title right, Reverend Traci Blackmon, who has also been a leader nationally on racial justice issues, and which we all know this is very interconnected to. And for then, so she'll help us talk a little bit about vision and strategy, and then we'll have some time set aside to talk about vision and strategy. So let us begin by opening in prayer. So I'd like to pass it over to Reverend Blackmon to start us off.
Thank you so much, Noel, and thank you for gathering us here. Welcome to all who have taken time out of their day to gather as church, to be church in a different way. We are excited because we were told normally our webinars track about 50 people and we'd have lots of space, and we've expanded twice to make sure that everyone has a space to get on. I see that we've already exceeded 100 and we're expecting to go even further than that. So grateful for all of the work that's being done in immigration justice right now, and certainly for the leadership of our team with Noel and our DC staff and everyone else who is doing this work on the ground in our local churches. We thought this would be a good way to bring us all together, because we keep hearing, what can we do? What can we do? And we want you to know what we are doing, and then also create space for what more can we do. So let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for the privilege of once again gathering to be church. We thank you for the passion of those who have signed on to this webinar. We thank you for their hearts and the hearts that they represent. We recognize that everyone does not have the privilege to take time out of their day to be on a webinar. So we thank you for the masses that are represented by the few that are gathered here. We thank you, God, for our commitment to lifting up the voices of those who others would rather not hear. Thank you for those who hear the cries of the children, all of the children, no matter where they are, no matter who their parents are, no matter what their circumstances are. We thank you for the opportunity to be your hands and your feet with them. Now, as we gather here to discern what you would have us to do collectively as the church, to move forward collectively as the church, we ask that you open our eyes that we might see, and open our ears that we might hear, and open our hearts that we might receive, and our minds that we might be changed. Above all, we ask that you help us to hold on to hope when it looks like everything is going to hell. These things we ask in Jesus' name, amen. You're on mute, Noel.
Thank you so much, Reverend Traci, for that inspiring prayer. It's so important to keep our focus and our hope and our spirituality in these incredibly difficult times. I just want to, before passing over to Katie to talk about the most current reality that we're facing on these recent rules that have been written by Attorney General Sessions, as well as the executive order that just came out. We're going to get to that, but I just want to set a little bit of a history. This is a pattern that has actually been part of an escalation of attack on immigrants for a long time. In 2005, we saw the first real shift towards the criminalization of migrants. Historically, going over your visa or even entering through an unlawful space, so not a port of entry, was considered a civic violation, not a criminal one. And it was only in 2005 that they started actually prosecuting for people crossing at not a port of entry. And we saw that first in Operation Streamline that started in El Paso. And then it moved to Tucson and Las Cruces. And now we just heard that they're now expanding it to San Diego here in the next couple of months. And in this, that is a pattern that continued through the Obama administration. And so that's one of the things we're fighting, is the criminal prosecution and criminalization of fleeing to find safety. And in this case, we're talking about criminalizing asylum seekers, which is a whole nother level of crisis for our humanitarian guidelines and principles. Then we see that in 2008, something rather good did take place in terms of the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act. Actually, it had a good provision in it that protected minor migrants coming from non-contiguous countries, meaning not Mexico or Canada. And in that, all minor children that come through are to be screened for asylum, screened for any type of credible fear by Health and Human Services. And then they are to be released and given a court date for them to be able to fight their case. And it's very important that we have, and which we have been doing, is helping these kids get legal services, because we find that 1 out of 10 child who doesn't have legal services will not win their case. But 6 out of 10 who do have legal services will win their cases. That's what we see in the numbers since the wave of 2014, when we saw this huge group of unaccompanied minors come through. Then we saw as well with families with minors coming through. The UCC did a lot on the ground in border spaces to receive those who were coming out of being released on their own recognizance, which was the practice of the Obama administration. Although we did find ourselves in a fight from 2014 to 2016 against family detention. And there were new family detention centers set up. And in fact, the Obama administration did try to appeal the Flores settlement. The Flores settlement is what a federal court, and now the Ninth Circuit Court has decided that no minor child should be in detention, full stop. Prolonged detention is not okay for minors, which we agree with. And so finally, we were able to get family detention taken out of our practices in 2016, thanks to that Ninth Circuit Court. And so at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Katie Adams now that we have a little timeline of the process of, certain things you're going to need to know about the policy aspects and the timeline history of what we've been working on in the past. And Mary will talk a little bit later more about all the work we've done since 2014.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Adams. I'm the Domestic Policy Advocate in the UCC DC office. And first off, I wanted to thank everyone who has taken action. From the action alerts we've sent out, we've had over 1,200 people take action, and that's generated 4,155 messages to Congress from UCC folks. That includes letters, tweets, phone calls, emails. So really appreciate all of that response. The denominational letter in concert with the action alerts that we've sent out have really helped us put that pressure on Congress. So the UCC, in coordination with the Interfaith Immigration Coalition, has been meeting with members of Congress, urging them to take action. This includes putting pressure on the administration to take compassionate and humane action, ending not just family separation, but the zero tolerance policy. Additionally, we're urging Congress to increase oversight of the Department of Homeland Security, their actions, and finally urging them to decrease funding for ICE and Customs and Border Patrol, asking them instead to put resources in developing thoughtful and compassionate immigration systems. So Noel has given a really great overview into kind of the history of this, and so I'm going to just talk about what has happened since May, really. So how did we get here? The administration, through the Department of Justice, in May issued a zero tolerance policy toward those crossing the border. So previously, the Justice Department didn't routinely target families for prosecution. Parents who are separated from their children are then referred to criminal court, even though the offense for entering the country illegally for the first time is a misdemeanor. So then children were then separated from their parents and classified as unaccompanied minors, and then placed with the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is through the Department of Health and Human Services. Because of the massive influx of children, ORR then had to start using temporary facilities, including the tent cities that you've read and heard about. So in the past several months, an average of 65 children a day were separated from their families. The latest numbers say that over 2,300 children were separated from over 2,200 parents. So basically, this is making it impossible for people to seek asylum without breaking the law, and treating the act of crossing the border as justification for criminal treatment. So after a lot of pressure from Congress, from the Fourth Estate, and from constituents all around the country, including faith communities, the administration issued an executive order saying that they were ending family separation. But the order actually doesn't do a whole lot. It still leaves the zero tolerance policy underlying the issue of child separation in place. This means all asylum seekers caught crossing the border between ports of entry will still face prosecution, except now they will, in many cases, be detained with their children. As Noel just recently talked about, it also conflicts with the court-enforced agreement from 1997 called the Flores Settlement, which prohibits the government from keeping children in immigration detention for more than 20 days. It's unclear how this conflict will be resolved, but the order instructs the Department of Justice to appeal that ruling. The order also instructed the Department of Defense to provide assistance in housing detained immigrants. One thing the order didn't do is provide information about what will happen to the children who have already been separated from their parents. Right now, the administration doesn't have a good answer for that. The bottom line, this could keep children with their parents, but it does nothing about the Attorney General's zero tolerance policy. Parents will still be criminally prosecuted for crossing the border illegally, but they might now remain with their children. Just today, Customs and Border Patrol said that they will perhaps stop prosecuting parents until there are enough facilities to maintain the housing of immigrants, but there's not a lot of information about that, and that didn't come from the administration. Essentially, the order appears to be the next step in the administration's larger agenda, which is eliminating basic protections for asylum seekers. They've done this by downplaying the humanity of immigrants and creating an immigration crisis that didn't exist. The immigration plans to push a sham legal process and deport immigrants as quickly as possible. And so I think that looking at the detention facilities, really the executive order, which is being touted by a lot of lawmakers as well as the administration as the fix to this problem, isn't really that at all. The goal here has been to reduce access to the asylum system, and it really will allow the administration to hold kids and families for a long time. The administration is using these issues as a way to push for a border wall and end programs that allow for immigration and family reunification, and instead turn to an immigration system that is very closed off. Congress is doing a few things right now. There are several bills that have been introduced or that have been talked about. There's the Keeping Families Together Act, which has strong support by Senate Democrats, is introduced by Senator Feinstein. That prohibits the separation of children and their families at the border and requires information to be given to parents on the location and update of where their children are in detention. Then there are several pieces of legislation in the House and the Senate that are fairly identical: the Protect Kids and Parents Act, the Equal Protection of Unaccompanied Minors Act, and then pieces in the immigration bill, the Ryan immigration bill, which is currently being considered. Right now, though, none of them fix the zero tolerance policy, which is the underlying factor of this. So any legislation in Congress doesn't address that issue. It's important to remember as you're talking about this with people that the administration can stop doing this at any time. They don't have to jail families, nor do they have to pursue criminal prosecution for these families. On the legislative side, what you can do, you're already doing it. The letters, calls, emails, and general outcry have driven this issue to the forefront. Keeping up the pressure is important. The administration says they're going to stop separating families, but that's a misnomer, because if they pursue criminal prosecution and pursue detention and then deportation on a much faster scale, then children will still be separated from their families, perhaps at a different time. The cruel and inhumane treatment of children and their families in the detention facilities, you guys have all seen and read the stories. These are not places for children or families to be. So again, while the president has said that he's done something about this, the administration could choose to dismantle their guidance, the zero tolerance guidance. So it's your voices that's going to town halls, writing letters to the editor, and then some of the action and planning we're going to talk about in a minute. That's really what keeps the pressure on. So that's an update kind of how we got here, what's happening immediately. And like I said, the pieces of legislation that are being considered right now by Congress don't talk about the zero tolerance policy at all towards criminal prosecution. And they only talk about really indefinite detention of children with their families. I'm going to turn it back over to Noel.
Great. Thank you so much for that rundown, Katie. And we will have time for questions at the end here. So feel free to keep those questions rolling, and feel free to chat us as we go here. it is, we've seen the rhetoric that goes along with this, and in the chaos of the administration, comparing immigrants essentially to animals or infestations, and the dehumanization that has been part of these images of seeing kids essentially in what looks to be cages, even as they're being held by an agency that has been at least trying to help them, Health and Human Services. So, but we will we will pass it on now to Reverend Randy Mayer, who has been experiencing the influx of asylum seekers and the root causes having to do so much with the gang violence, the domestic violence, a lot of times there's political violence that is masked in gang violence in Central America in particular, and there is a lot of that violence in Mexico as well, and it is very unfortunate our asylum system doesn't recognize those facing similar circumstances in Mexico as asylum seekers, and now this administration wants to not count any of the Central Americans or domestic violence or gang violence at all as a credible fear claim, which is very unfortunate. So, Reverend Randy Mayer, are you with us to tell us a little bit more about what's been going on your front on the U.S. Arizona Sonoran border?
All right. Yeah, what we've seen here along the U.S.-Mexico border in Arizona is this is just a steady escalation of what's been happening along the border and to immigrant families for the past 15 years. It just keeps ramping up, and as ugly as this is, it's been ugly for a long time. And so we're glad that there's a lot of attention on this, and it's heartbreaking to have so many of these children and families being separated. Along here, we don't have, along the Arizona border, most of the detention centers for children have been in Texas. We are here along the Arizona border in Nogales. There are a lot of asylum seekers that are coming to the border. Over in California, it's just what I understand in California, in Tijuana, it's just really packed. And so a lot of them are moving over to Arizona. We have about, I think it's about 120 families that are now waiting at the border. About 20 families usually sleep at the port of entry, preparing themselves to present for asylum. The unfortunate thing is that the Trump administration has really been slowing down the number of people and families they process a day. It used to be they process 20 or more a day. It seems like right now it's about 3 to 5 families a day that they're able to process in Nogales. Nobody understands why it's slowed down. I think the same is happening over in Texas. So what we've been doing is providing food and water and sleeping pads and blankets and just activities for the kids. We've been going down 3 or 4 times a week to the Nogales border. There are now about 3 shelters that have been opened up so that the families don't have to actually stay at the border. They're able to stay in the shelters, and then when their number comes up, they move they go down and stay at the border. Last week when I was at the border, I had the opportunity to interview all the new immigrants that were coming as they were checking in to the Keno Border Initiative Comedor and support program for migrants. And it was really heartbreaking to hear the stories, because I think so many of the migrants had come, most of them were from Guatemala and El Salvador, and they had no idea that the laws had changed. They had spent the last month everything they had to get to the border. And so, just the broken hearts, the broken spirits is just very painful to witness and see their hearts just so broken, and they have nowhere to go. I think the reality is that what's happening in Central America and the United States has had a big role in causing a lot of the problems. Families aren't able to stay. There's just too much violence. There's too much happening that they're fleeing for their lives, and there's no way they can go back. The Good Shepherd has 2 asylum families that we've supported. One came about 2 years ago, and just a year ago won their asylum case, and are now filing for their green cards. And the Trump administration has even changed that process, and so they're worried if even though they received asylum from the judge, they're fearful that they may lose it now. So there are a lot of things that are changing. The other family has been here about 6 weeks, and they were one of the first families that came up from the Central American caravan, and they are, they were able to come in before all these rule changes, and so they're really kind of they have to check in next week with ICE, and we've been talking to the lawyers. Is that even safe for migrants for asylum seekers? Since the rules have changed, would they be forced into a detention center now? So a lot of fear. I was with the 2 mothers this morning, and I finally told them, you can't watch the TV. You can't watch. It's just too painful for them. They spend their whole day living in fear. And so that's a little picture of what we're involved in here. At least I know the Southwest Conference is involved in lots of different ways in immigration. We're closer to the border, so we're a little bit more engaged in that type of work. And it's great to hear the voices, and I'm getting lots of emails and calls from congregations across the country. So it feels like a movement is building, and we just have to keep making the calls and making sure that we're putting as much pressure on the administration. The thing I would always add is, President Trump is using the families and the children as a bargaining chip for his border wall. And our communities here along the border are the safest in the country. And he keeps using that and trying to get this massive wall that won't do anything. It's a waste of money. And so continue to pressure any of your Congress folks, don't fall for that lie. We don't need more militarization here along the border so that Trump can get whatever he thinks he's going to get. It's complete lie, and everybody just needs to keep working against that. That's it.
Thanks, Reverend Mayor, and thank you for all the work that you're doing down there on the border to serve those people in need. I know you've also been doing a lot of bearing witness, and I think less than a year ago you were part of a faith community action at Operation Streamline. I think that is one of the action steps that we're promoting, is that where these mass trials are happening, that we're showing a faith presence. And if we're able to do direct action in front of those mass trials, that is a critical step right now, and one of the action steps that we are calling on people to do. I'm going to just go through some of the actions that we're recommending people take, as well as some of the things we've heard from the faith community at large. We're seeing that the action we're generating, I'm sure it has something to do with the pastoral letters, as well as I know our president and CEO, General Minister Dorhauer, had put out a letter a little less than a month ago as well, before this decision even got worse. But we've also been putting out action alerts and toolkits Hopefully you all got the general faith community toolkit that is being live updated as things are changing every day. We're generating more calls and messages to Congress than we have in a very long time at the UCC Justice and Witness DC office. So that has everything to do with you all. So keep up that good work and spread the news. Those calls to Congress do make a difference. And in fact, we did see all of the Democrats in the Senate come up with a bill and sign on to it that said that they would limit family separation at the border. And the increased pressure from Republicans also has helped the administration backpedal on some of the things they were doubling down on. As we prepare for the next recess, which will be June 30th to July 8th, we encourage you to go ahead and make those reservations, those meetings in district. You need to schedule those meetings ahead of time. You can start scheduling them now. There's going to be mass mobilizations on June 30th throughout the country, and you can go to familiesbelongtogether.org, I believe is the website, and there's a place where you can see where all those actions are moving forward. So that is a way that we can continue to hit the streets. Continuing to amplify on social media, you all have been doing that. Please keep that up and try to keep what your faith community is doing in those updates to show the support of the UCC and the faith community. Same thing goes for opinion editorials and letters to the editor. That, of course, is very important. Petitions, we're considering putting together a UCC petition. Of course, donating. We put together an appeal, and Mary will talk a little bit more about that. Now, continued mobilizations and direct actions is very important at this point. We're encouraging people to go to your local ICE offices, any federal buildings or Border Patrol offices that you have there in your region. That regional continued action is going to be very important. And as I mentioned, hitting up those mass trials is also very important, and making sure that our prophetic witness is being heard. So the ways in which we've had faith leaders speaking out in the media, we saw that the Catholic bishops denounced this, that the United Methodists are bringing up Sessions, since he's Methodist, on charges. Those are the types of sort of creative, ethical spectacle that we have to continue to make. And now there's a lot of questions we've had. Those in El Paso, our UCC congregations, Revolution UCC and Las Cruces UCC, have been involved in the actions that took place just this last Sunday at Beto O'Rourke helped organize, where the tent city is being built. So that was also another way to lift up the denouncement of these child facilities, although we do want to be careful around that, because Health and Human Services is under the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and they are essentially not our enemy. They're not the ones that are putting this forward, these policies. And in essence, we want to be careful that there's not a backlash against the Trafficking Victims Protections Reauthorization Act, which is what the concern is if we target HHS facilities. Now, the TVPRA did come under attack in 2014 by the Republicans. They talked about rolling it back. We want to try to make sure that that doesn't enter into the dialogue or the strategy of our opponents. So, of course, there's part of what we want to do today is just hear your feedback or what action steps you're taking. But we really have seen that the prophetic, bold voice through all of this social media, traditional media, the faith community coming out strong has made a real difference. And the administration is definitely backing up, and even Border Patrol is backing up, but they're still saying that they're going to prosecute families, if not tomorrow, later on when ICE has more facilities. That's a huge problem for us. So with that, I want to pass it over to talk about the UCC work on this from the perspective of refugee and disaster response. So Mary Schaller Blaufuss, I think you're with us.
I am here.
Right.
And hello, everybody. I'm not only here by myself, but I am with youth who are participating in the West Central Regional Youth Event. And the youth have really gotten engaged. There's a couple of, several here who are with me in the room as they're doing this webinar as part of a workshop on accompanying refugees. And the group as a whole is going to be doing an offering this evening related to the separated families at the borders. So I am much inspired by our youth. Refugee Ministries in the United Church of Christ has been one of the strong ministries that 40, 50 years ago was part of the National Council of Churches, helping to establish with the State Department and the Congress a system whereby refugees who are registered through the United Nations High Commission on Refugees could be resettled within the United States. And through partners with Church World Service, the United Church of Christ has been a strong presence nationally and in your local congregations with resettling refugees during those days. So we have expertise locally, nationally, internationally that we bring to this current crisis. One of the things about the humanitarian and development work and the justice work of the United Church of Christ is that we work on root causes, we work in crisis moments, and we work for the long term. And so with asylum-seeking families coming to the US border from Central America, they have experienced many of the things that those who are part of the UNHCR refugee system have experienced in other parts of the world, but there is no mechanism allowed to be able to qualify folks from Central America to be defined as refugees. I have colleagues that call it refugees by another name. And I think Amanda Sheldon is on this call too. And so I borrow that phrase from you. So in this current crisis, there are so many intersections and overlaps with the asylum-seeking families and our system of refugee resettlement in the United States, not least of which is that the system of refugee resettlement is also under attack by our US government, and that we have been limited to 45,000 refugees through that system being allowed into the country this year, but because of a lot of bureaucracy and so-called security checks, we are probably only going to be allowed 15 to 20,000 refugees into the United States. So this is a time when we not only need to put on our hospitality hats and helping people to feel welcome, but also working across the system as we do with advocacy and to make sure that those legal and those possible avenues of entry into the United States for safety, for welcome, are kept open. So this is part of, this moment is a crisis moment in part of a larger system. And so as part of that, we have opened a financial appeal specifically for families that are being separated at the border in this crisis. And there have already been solidarity grants that have gone to the Church of the Good Shepherd. You just heard Randy speak, that have gone to the Southwest Conference for to enable the wider church to be in support of these local efforts. And so your participation in the special mission offerings enables that financial support to be able to be where it is most needed at the time it is most needed. This is a time when we can go even deeper and we can have an even more robust response. And so we've opened this special appeal. We are calling it Keeping Families Together, and it can be accessed from the front page of ucc.org on one of the photo sliders, Keeping Families Together, and you'll have a donate spot there. And so would highly encourage you to share this as one of the concrete ways that we can be supporting families and children. We know that children that have been separated from their families are not only in Texas and California and Arizona, but have been sent all over the country. And so through United Church of Christ partnerships and coalitions, ecumenical partners, these funds will be available to help support in those humanitarian efforts as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mary, for breaking that all down, and for certainly we are seeing a lot of our congregation taking in asylum seekers. A couple people mentioned it in our chat. And as you mentioned, it is very, very similar to the same skills needed that a lot of our churches participate in with refugee resettlement and co-sponsorship. So very glad that we have these coordination across our different set departments in the UCC. So great, thank you so much. And we'll pass it over now to Reverend Traci Blackmon. Thank you for your leadership on this issue, and in general, your amazing prophetic and bold voice on social justice issues for the UCC. Are you with us, Traci?
It helps if you unmute. That always helps, right?
Yep, exactly. We got you now.
Thank you. Thank you. It's important that we all know the work that is happening. We are in a crisis mode right now. And every time we're in crisis mode, we certainly want to know that the United Church of Christ is at the front of these battles that matter so much to all of us. So we gathered this group together for the webinar, first to let you know that we're not asleep and that we're working in various ways, some very public and some not so public, and also to open opportunities for you to engage. So the links that have been provided for you for the toolkit will give you some ideas of ways that you can engage if you want to do public witness, if you want to do donations, if you want to write letters to Congress. All of those things matter. And just so you know, we are planning a collective day of lobbying. We've been talking to some of the Congress, the senators, and have been told that that might be very, very helpful to have a day when we are coming to DC to lobby as the United Church of Christ, doing that as an interfaith effort with others who want to come as well, having people of faith storm the Capitol while both houses are in session can be very powerful. In addition, we are an ecumenical-led group, and so we work well with others. And there are already actions that you are able to tap into that are happening all over. We have churches that are on the border that are serving, and for some of those churches, it would be a strain for us to show up because they are busy trying to do the work and don't want to stop to have to host. They would host, but don't want to have to stop to try to host because the need is so urgent. So really, we're asking you to get in where you fit in, and we will do a better job of making sure that we're all connected and are able to see the bigger picture that we create when we connect all of these dots. And stay tuned for the lobby day. We'll be asking that as many of you can will register for that and come to DC. We already have a tentative date, but I don't want to give that until it's secured, a date when everybody will be in session so that we can be as effective as possible. I want to close my time with you by reading you a letter that I received this morning. It was in my email when I woke up. It's from one of our pastors. Her name is Rena Ramos. She's on the West Coast. And many of you will remember a couple of years ago, just when the Pulse massacre happened, Rena was one of our Spanish-speaking pastors that Justice and Witness was able to facilitate her arrival in Florida to be able to work with devastated Spanish-speaking families then. This is the letter that she sent me this morning, and I'm going to try to read it without tearing up. Dear Pastor Traci, I share it with her permission, let me say that. Dear Pastor Traci, these days have been particularly hard because I know firsthand the experience of child crossing the U.S. border. I understand the fear, the exhaustion, the pain. When I crossed the border, I was just 14 years old. One of our attempts to cross the border failed. We had walked for hours in the dark of the night, and the Border Patrol got us and put our group in a van to spend the night. We were locked in that van the rest of the night. We were given no water and weren't allowed to go to the bathroom. It was dehumanizing. And I remember feeling out of my body, looking from above what was happening to my aunt, my brother, and me. The next day we were released and put back in Tijuana. Then my aunt decided we needed to change coyotes or smugglers because the people who had us weren't going to really help us cross. She negotiated our transfer to a set of smugglers that finally helped us cross the border. Our second attempt was successful, and we only walked 20 minutes, laid on the grass, and then got picked up by cars that took us to safety houses in San Diego. This was the beginning of our lives in the U.S. We got reunited with my mother in New York. My mother and my aunt raised us. My aunt adopted us legally to provide us with a green card. Growing up in Long Island as an immigrant kid was hard. We were constantly reminded we did not belong. The associate principal of a school we attended yelled at us for speaking Spanish. God has been good to us, and despite so much discrimination, my brother and I got advanced degrees. He is a transplant surgeon in Philadelphia. I too was able to graduate from law school and practice law for a while before beginning to preach. I know we were fortunate 36 years ago because laws were different and there were ways to get legalized. Now the anti-immigrant sentiment has made almost impossible for people to make it. I felt I needed to share my story with you because I know the UCC is a progressive voice of Christianity. I want to write an article. I am not sure how to amplify the message that our immigrant brothers and sisters are deserving of the most basic humanity and dignity. I want to let people know nobody wants to rob America. We want to contribute, to dream, to fail, to be restored, to have lives in freedom. Please keep being a strong voice because people are listening to you. I am. Con mucho amor, love, Rena. I don't know if that touches you the way that it touched me, but it certainly says why it is so important that we continue to do the work that we're doing, that we continue to pray and we continue to move our feet, that we continue to act collectively and we continue to act individually, that we stand on what we know to be the truth of the gospel, that every human being is deserving of dignity, deserving of shelter, deserving of love, and that no one is unwanted in God's eyes. I am privileged to work with all of you, and I'm grateful for the work you're already doing, and hope as soon as you hear when our lobby day is, you will make it your business to spread the word and to sign up and let the UCC be seen at Capitol Hill on that day. I want to thank Noel and thank the DC office and thank Mayor Schaller Blaufuss and thank Randy and everyone who has contributed to giving us a better picture of the scope of the work that we're doing and the scope of the task ahead of us. You have a great evening, and God bless you all.
And so we now will move into a time of question and answer. It was so great to hear Rena Ramos's story. Of course, Rena fleeing the violence of the Civil War in El Salvador, a war the U.S. helped fund and train people in. So important to hear that story. We have a couple questions already in the chat box. Feel free to type in more, and then prepare to unmute yourself if you want to ask your question. The first question is, do we know how these children are getting reunited with their families? We've heard that some are being shipped to states across the country through private agencies contacted with the government.
Hi, yeah, so like I said, the executive order doesn't provide a lot of information about how children are being reunited with their families. We just heard that the 1-800 number that's being given to families doesn't actually work outside the United States. So there's still a lot of confusion. Children were shipped to different parts of the country. There's a tender age facility nearby in Virginia. But in terms of reuniting with their parents, there isn't an administrative plan at this point. And so that's something that we have to keep like strong oversight on, because their HHS said yesterday, that they're working on ways to figure this out, but there wasn't a plan going into it, I think. And so as they're coming out of this, there isn't a great plan either. I wish I had a more concrete answer. And the more information that we get on this, we'll be sure to share with you so that you can share that with your networks and make sure that people are getting the information that they need.
So certainly one of the most disturbing parts of this, and they do have the opportunity to be released with a sponsor. Usually it's a family member. It can take a long time to process and find that sponsor. And we have heard reports, as indicated in this question, that private agencies are making lots of money. There was a report today, I believe, on Southwest Keys, some sort of private agency that is housing children that is making almost a $500 million contract with the government. So that's certainly part of the scenario. Another question was, how will the donations to the UCC be, what will be given towards? I know that a lot of it will go to congregations like Randy's, or I saw Eileen from Palo Alto mention, I know in Portland, Maine, there's many congregations that are actually housing asylum seekers. So some of it is like basic needs costs, and then definitely around legal representation. So those are, Mary, do you want to add to that how the donations will be used?
I don't have anything to add to that. I would agree with those two different kinds of use, both for food, shelter, clothing, activities, and for some legal assistance, which has both an immediate and a long-term care.
Great. Another question about oversight or conditions in private prisons or detention centers. Well, we have seen that there's a lot of reports. ACLU came out with one just a week or so ago about abuse of children that are being held. That's mainly been abuse from Border Patrol. And as described in Rena's story, Border Patrol does usually hold these kids for 24 to 48 hours. There's also, in the detention as a whole, there's a lot of reports from the Detention Watch Network, from the ACLU, from Grassroots leadership about abuse and in detentions, and even oftentimes rape. So these are not good conditions that we're looking at. I know that Health and Human Services is over capacity and is trying to do the best they can to process them and get them out to sponsors. But certainly the conditions they're in, we're seeing pictures of them sleeping on the ground.
And there's been a lot of work from medical associations and doctors associations that have been providing kind of information on what happens to children when they're detained, whether or not they're separated from families or just in detention. And so KIND put out a pretty important report that talked about just the effect that the detention has on children and their long-term well-being, and how what's happening right now will have pretty long-term effects. And so that's something that we're really focused on explaining to members of Congress and saying, you know, this is something that will stick with children for a really long time.
There's a question about, is this, you know, there's a detention center not far from the Central Atlantic Conference. Would that be a good site for protest? I think if it's we're talking about adult detention center, then yes, I think that it would be. And detention centers, there we have seen a lot of protests and actions, and I think we want to see that public witness continue to move forward the public narrative that this is an atrocity and a human rights violations. How do we be a more inclusive strategy that effectively changes immigration policy? It is great that people are responding to the family separation, but as Katie said, it doesn't change the overall awful policies. Who's working on thinking through ways to influence legislators that is not enough to family separation unless we stop or change entire policy? Oh, that's somebody, Pat Rumor from our UCC National Collaborative. Very good question, Pat.
Hi, Pat, and everyone else. So absolutely, we're communicating with Congress that ending family separation isn't enough. And so it's part of a longer term conversation we've been having. You know, the UCC is fortunate to be a part of, like I said, the Interfaith Immigration Coalition. And we've been having meetings for quite some time, talking to members about some of the bright lines that we have for immigration reform overall. And so, you know, that started, you know, that's been ongoing work. And so right now there's kind of a multi-fold level that we're talking to people about family separation, but we're also really focusing on congressional oversight, like I said. And that's everything from asking members to write letters to the administration, but it's also talking about mandating how the funding for these departments is done. So talking about report language in the appropriations bills for the Customs and Border Patrol and ICE, and saying that, you know, funding can't be used for detention, or funding must be used in humane and compassionate ways, and trying to really influence how that money is spent. And so like I said, the Interfaith Immigration Coalition has a bright lines paper, or a paper that talks about what our principles are for immigration reform, and making sure that they focus on family unity. And you know, so we can direct you to that, and it's part of the as part of the toolkit also for kind of thinking about the longer term strategy.
And also a plug for the UCC National Collaborative on Immigration. We need sustained leadership and activism on this. So would love for you all to join. We have the email list, so you know, we'll send out a follow-up about how to join and be part of some of our regular updates and actions and strategy sessions. Probably you all saw the Immigrant Welcoming Congregation the resolution that we passed, and we've seen a bunch of different conferences as well as congregations move forward covenants around becoming an immigrant welcoming congregation, and then we see that people continue to get engaged. And of course the elections play a role in this, and we are a 501c3, so we'll just say that we really need to get people out to vote. We do know that whatever the outcome of the midterms elections, will essentially dictate a mandate on immigration policy. You know, if these policies, if essentially voters reward these type of policies, we are in for big trouble in 2019. Is it in, we can try to get the toolkit in Spanish. We do have some capacity problems around that. Be great. Maybe if there's any interpreters on this call, maybe we could think about, you know, contracting interpreters, because we're always in need for getting the materials out in a quick fashion in Spanish. And we're seeing that there is a lot of activity in Portland about, you know, rapid response teams. We're seeing increased raids. That's another way in which ICE is attacking the immigrant community. We saw a big raid in Ohio, so that rapid response is very important. I'm looking through questions about the budget in terms of immigration and the appropriations process. It just says specific ask. So like, I think what was being mentioned before there, Jerry, was about how we need to try to defund the ICE and CBP. So cut funding to DHS if possible. I think that's a specific ask that we have. We say no more boots, no more border wall, and no more detention center. Right, so there was this question about the lost children. So this was something that was a bit of a misinterpretation or miscommunication that was misconstrued by mass media. So, you know, there was, from the unaccompanied children that have been coming through since 2014, there have been children that have been essentially fallen off of DHS's map. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're lost. What it does mean is that they've probably moved, or their location has changed and ICE hasn't been able to track them, or DHS hasn't been able to track them, or that they didn't show up to their court date. Now, this is a problem for us in the advocacy community, because we want these kids to be able to fight their cases and to be able to adjust status eventually. So if they don't show up to their court date, if they don't get legal representation, which is a big problem we've had, is the kids most of the time end up with an aunt or an uncle or a family member, and that family member might not have the resources to help or the know-how to go and get the right legal help that they need. So that's one of our roles in the community, as faith communities, is really searching out these kids, making sure that they're getting legal representation and showing up to their court date. In terms of calling to find the missing children, that's something we're recommending not to push, because what that could mean, and what we've heard, is that ICE might use these addresses that they're getting when when the sponsors come to pick up their children. Many of them may be undocumented. And so the concern is that ICE will go after these undocumented family members of unaccompanied children. Definitely a good point from Michael Nuroff, who works here in our DC office, about the importance of knowing the root causes, and the Latin American Working Group is a good resource for that. Certainly, our military intervention and trade policies have quite a bit of responsibility in the root causes. So I think the raid in Ohio was in Salem, not far from Youngstown. And that was one of I think the biggest raid since Postville, 160 plus people. So we're on rapid response mode there. Not just 2 weeks before that, there was a raid, and also in Ohio, in Sandusky. So getting the resources out about rapid response to raids is also very important. So I know that we are over our time. Is there any other questions before we sign off? I hope this has been an educational webinar and also something that inspires us all to action.
I have a quick question. As a local church pastor, is it possible to get a copy of the letter that Traci wrote, published, so that we could possibly use that during church and preaching?
Yes, definitely. It's on our website, and we can, I think it's on the immigration page, but it's certainly up, and we can send that out to you. We'll send that out in a link to in a follow-up email. All right. Well, this has been very, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I know there was over 130 people at some point on this call today, and I see people are starting to drop off. We're over our time. So we're very thankful for you all and all the work you're doing in the field. Keep up the great work. Keep praying for these kids and keep taking action.
Yeah, thank you so much. Every call and email, and it makes a difference, and it's really important as we continue this work. So thank you to everyone.